The night ripped open with flashing blue lights and shouting voices. On the ground now, a cop barked, his gun already half drawn. James Carter froze, his boots planted on the wet pavement, stunned. He had just stepped out of a corner store with nothing but a bottle of water. Yet suddenly, the world treated him like a fugitive. Within seconds, rough hands shoved him forward, his chest colliding with the hood of a squad car. Sirens wailed, bystanders gasped, and James's dog tags clinked against the metal. Nobody cared that he was a veteran. They only saw the color of his skin. The blow came fast, a baton pressing across his back as one officer spat. "Don't move." His backpack slipped from his shoulder, spilling onto the street. Out tumbled a folded American flag, stained at the edges from years of being carried. Rain splattered across it, streaking the stars and stripes. James twisted his head toward it, panic flashing in his eyes. That flag wasn't just cloth. It was his brother's lost overseas, his blood in foreign sand. But the cops didn't even glance at it. They only sneered, cuffing his wrists so tightly he felt the bones grind. A crowd began to form, whispers rising like smoke. "What's going on?" a woman murmured. A teenager lifted his phone, camera blinking red. James locked eyes with him for a fleeting second. That boy's trembling hands gave him hope. Maybe the world would finally see. But then a cop slammed the cruiser door shut, cutting off his view, cutting off his air. James stared at his reflection in the rain-streaked glass. The face looking back wasn't the soldier who once carried comrades across battlefields. It was the face of a suspect, treated like nothing. Inside the moving car, silence screamed louder than the sirens. James's heart pounded, his chest heaving. He tried to steady his breathing the way he had in combat. But this wasn't Iraq. This was his own hometown. How had it come to this? The officer in the passenger seat chuckled darkly. Another thug off the streets. Thug. The word seared deeper than the cuffs, cutting into his wrists. James clenched his jaw, swallowing the urge to shout. His training told him. Survive the moment. But every second felt like betrayal by the very country he defended. The precinct smelled of sweat and stale coffee when they dragged him inside. They shoved him onto a hard bench, his cuffs biting deeper. One officer scribbled on a report sheet, without looking up. Charges: resisting arrest, loitering, disturbing the peace. Lies, written with casual ease. James's voice was steady but low. "I didn't resist. I didn't disturb anything." The cop smirked. "Sure you didn't." The laughter of the others followed, bouncing off the cinder block walls. Their mockery wasn't just cruelty. It was confidence. They believed no one would hold them accountable. Minutes bled into eternity. James studied the clock above the desk, every tick hammering into him like a reminder that his dignity was slipping away. His wrists throbbed, raw and swollen. Yet he sat tall, shoulders squared, the posture of a man who had faced worse. He whispered under his breath, "Don't let them see you break." It was the same mantra he had carried through firefights overseas. But here in America, his battlefield was prejudice, and the enemy wore badges. He wondered, how many others had sat on this bench, silenced the same way? Then the door burst open. A thunder of heavy boots filled the room. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Everyone stepped back. Agents stormed in, their voices cutting through the air like blades. The cops froze mid-laugh, their pens dropping. The lead agent's glare swept across the room, landing on James, still in cuffs. "Uncuff him. Now." His tone was ice. One officer stammered. He was resisting. But the agent silenced him with a sharp hand. "You just arrested James Carter, Silver Star recipient, Iraq and Afghanistan veteran, and more importantly, our key witness in a federal investigation." The room went dead quiet. The officers' faces drained of color, their arrogance crumbling like glass under a hammer. The cuffs clicked open, falling to the floor with a clang that echoed like justice itself. James flexed his wrists, the red marks glaring like proof. He lifted his head, his eyes locking on the men who had mocked him. Not a word left his lips, but his silence screamed louder than their excuses. For the first time all night, the power shifted. The predators realized they had cornered the wrong man, and the storm was just beginning. The FBI agents closed in, their presence suffocating the swagger out of every cop in the room. James stood slowly, shoulders squared, his body aching but unbroken. The lead agent's voice carried the weight of authority as he turned toward the officers. You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. You saw a black man and decided that was enough. No one argued. Their silence was an admission louder than any defense. The walls of the precinct seemed to shrink around them. One cop, the youngest, tried to mumble, We didn't know who he was." The agent's eyes narrowed. "You didn't care who he was. That's the problem." The words hit like gunfire, each syllable stripping away their arrogance. James watched them flinch, but he didn't gloat. He had seen enough men broken in combat to know that collapse wasn't victory. It was exposure. The truth was now laid bare, and exposure was the beginning of justice. The agent surrounded James, guiding him toward the exit. But before he left, he turned back to the bench where he had sat in chains only moments earlier. His voice, steady and deliberate, filled the room. "You thought silence was weakness, but silence is patience, and patience always runs out." He didn't raise his tone. He didn't need to. The officers' faces told the story. The smirks gone, replaced by the wide-eyed dread of men realizing their empire of intimidation had cracked. Outside, the night had transformed. The crowd was larger now, pushing against barricades, voices rising in unison. Some shouted in anger, some in disbelief, and others in defiant pride. "He's a hero," someone cried. "This is racism," another shouted. Cameras flashed, live streams rolled, and the story that had begun on one teenager's trembling phone was now spreading across the nation in real time. James stepped into the glare of headlights and lenses. The FBI agents at his side, and the noise erupted like a wave crashing against rocks. The teenager who had first recorded the arrest was at the front, his phone still raised. His eyes locked on James with awe. "They were going to bury you," he whispered, though the words streamed live to thousands. James nodded slightly, acknowledging him. That small act of courage, the decision to film, had turned humiliation into revelation. Without it, his truth would have been swallowed whole. For a moment, James realized that justice often started not in courtrooms, but in the hands of ordinary people who refused to look away. From the crowd, a young woman stepped forward carrying something carefully folded. She had retrieved it from the gutter, washed the grime away, and pressed it flat. It was his flag, the same flag that had slipped from his backpack when he was thrown to the ground. She held it out, her voice trembling. "Sir, this belongs to you." James took it with both hands, his throat tightening. He clutched the fabric to his chest, the memories of fallen brothers and sleepless nights in foreign sand rushing back. That flag had been spat on, trampled, dismissed. But in his hands again it was reborn. The chant softened as the crowd watched him. James raised the flag slightly, his voice carrying over the hush. "This is what I fought for. Not hatred, not lies. For freedom, for truth." The words were simple, but they cut deep. People cheered, some cried, and others saluted him in respect. For the first time that night, the veteran was not invisible. He was seen, he was honored, and the world was listening. The FBI convoy waited, engines humming. The lead agent leaned toward James. "We'll handle the charges. Every officer involved will answer for this." The crowd roared its approval, but James's eyes weren't on the cops anymore. He looked upward, past the chaos, toward the stars peeking through the clouds. He thought of comrades buried overseas, of promises made in desert heat, of sacrifices that were supposed to mean something. Tonight, those promises felt alive again. He wasn't broken. He was standing, carrying the weight of them all. As the convoy pulled away, cameras flashing, James rested against the seat, exhaustion tugging at his bones. Yet underneath, a spark burned. What had happened tonight was bigger than him. It was about every man or woman who had been silenced, cuffed, dismissed because of their skin. His story was no longer his alone. It belonged to all who had been unseen. And this time, the world couldn't look away. His silence had turned into a megaphone. His humiliation had become a reckoning. James Carter had entered the night as a suspect, dragged down by prejudice, mocked by men who thought they were untouchable. But he left it as a symbol, a reminder that truth has teeth, and once unleashed, it doesn't let go. The racist cops would face their downfall. Their names would be etched in shame. But James's name would carry differently. Spoken with respect, remembered as a man who endured, and as proof that silence doesn't mean surrender. His flag was folded in his lap, his scars etched on his skin, but his spirit stood taller than ever. And as the truth came crashing down, James Carter's dignity rose above their hate. A reminder that justice always finds its way. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.